Well, our use of water is tremendous, so the volumes of water we use is extraordinary and unsustainable. So we're leading to problems with water pollution, water scarcity around the world. It's a problem for 2 out of 5 people now. They don't have enough water, and that's going to get worse over time. We're looking at 3 out of 5 people by 2025 won't have enough water. That kind of scarcity manifests itself in different ways depending on where you are. Some places it means water restrictions. Other places it means you have no water at all and you're going to have to move because you just don't have enough water to sustain yourself and your family. Well, as I mentioned, the 2 out of 5 people currently are facing water shortages. So for a month or 2 or even longer, every year, they're having to deal with water shortages. That can be as bad as not having enough water to drink or to wash your clothes, or in other places in the world, it can mean water restrictions where you're limited to just a certain amount of water you can use during the day. This is a problem that's going to increase with time as we continue to consume more water, and with climate change, which is disrupting the precipitation patterns around the world. Water's falling in different places than it used to, or drying up other places. So it's becoming a crisis. The World Economic Forum continues to say year after year, the biggest threat humanity faces is water crises. Energy is the second biggest user of water. In the United States, it's a particularly large water footprint for energy, almost as big as agriculture. You need water to generate electricity in coal plants or gas plants or in nuclear plants, because basically those are systems that boil water. So they got to suck water out of lakes and rivers, sometimes from underground, and you heat it up to make steam, to drive a turbine, to produce electricity. A lot of the water in those processes is lost. It evaporates, disappears into the atmosphere. We can't use that water again because it's gone into the atmosphere. Sure, it's part of a water cycle, but the water ends up somewhere else, not in the place where we took it from. Other forms of energy, such as solar and wind, don't need water to generate electricity. A solar panel might need a little water once in a while to wash some dust off, but generally speaking, they don't need any water to produce power. So it's another benefit of green energy, is it's not a big water consumer. So fracking is a process of pumping high-pressure water and chemicals underground to release little pockets of gas or oil, sometimes 2 miles below the earth. Fracking uses about 5 million gallons per frac, and that water is contaminated by the chemicals that are used, as well as the stuff that's way down 2 miles below the earth. And it's not recaptured or reused. It's very hard to clean. So with this contaminated water, it has to be then pumped even deeper underground to safely dispose of it. This is a permanent removal of water from the water cycle. This is the first time on a massive scale that we humans are taking water out of the water cycle permanently. There's other impacts of things like fracking. Because of pumping all that water underground, it's created all sorts of earthquake problems in much of the Midwest, Nebraska, Arkansas. Many of those regions where this is happening, it's generating hundreds of small quakes and sometimes some big ones. And it's destabilizing the crust, the earth, underneath many, many communities. It's continuing. It's only going to get worse. So with biofuels, we're growing corn or soy to turn it into a fuel that we can burn in our cars or trucks. Those plants actually don't have a lot of energy. So you're taking a green plant and trying to turn it into something like gasoline. That's not a very efficient or smart thing to do because there isn't that much energy in one single plant. got to remember that oil is the product of millions of years of plant matter that's been crushed under the earth under tremendous pressures and temperatures. And there's tons and tons of this vegetable matter that went into making the oil that we have today. So we're trying to duplicate that process in a much shorter time. It's not working very well. It's very inefficient. It uses huge amounts of water. Ethanol and soy diesel has a tremendous water footprint because you've got to produce all this plant material using huge amounts of water and fertilizers. So we have water pollution and a huge amount of water to produce not very much fuel. So if you can imagine a car going down the road, if its tank is full of ethanol or even 10%, really what it's doing is it's carrying on its roof a gigantic bag of water, because that's how much water it took to make that fuel. The bag of water is many times larger than the vehicle. And as we all know, water is very heavy. So it really doesn't make any sense, but that's the thing we're doing. Well, American water use has always been, I suppose, inefficient and wasteful. We've always assumed we can get water, it's like the frontier mentality. We always assume we can get water somewhere else. If we don't have enough, we'll go get some more. So the giant aquifers that America has, most of them are going dry because we always assume there's going to be more water. And so we just keep pumping them and pumping them, even though we now know what it takes, how much water we could take on a sustainable basis. That hasn't stopped. Continue to take more than can be sustained. So this particular mentality means that we are using much more water than we need to. We could be way more efficient with our water use, but we're not, because it's just simply not part of our thinking when we come to make decisions about how we use water, or even awareness about how much water is being used to make the food, the clothes, the things that we have in our houses. Well, one of the big pluses of renewable energy is it doesn't take any water to generate electricity. So we could really reduce the energy, the water footprint of the energy sector by changing more of our electricity generation over to renewables. So that'd be a huge water savings all by itself. We'd also reduce contamination because obviously coal, when it's burned, emits a lot of mercury, and the mercury gets into the water and the food system, and it's a very bad pollutant. So that has to be cleaned before we can use the water for drinking. So we'd avoid that problem as well. Similar situation for nuclear, because sometimes some of the nuclear particles don't stay in the nuclear plant, they end up in the waterway. So we have a much better use of water by using renewable energy, and we reduce the amount of pollution in the environment. So black water is sewage. Gray water is what comes out of your shower. So black water has to be particularly treated because it may have bacteria and other things, whereas gray water from your shower or from your washing dishes, that can be reused to put on your plants, for water your garden, water your lawn. A lot of places around the world use gray water. They have two separate systems in their sewage system where they can reuse gray water. Some places now are doing quick treatments of black water and using that water, so sewer water, and using that to water things like golf courses. Places that are dry, like California, actually has some separate systems where they can use their gray water. I mean, you can do it yourself. You just empty out your sink with a bucket and use it to feed your plants. So when we get into food products, food is a big water user. And some foods are way more water intense than others. Generally speaking, meat and dairy is far more water intensive than plant matter. So when we have our eggs and bacon and some maybe toast for breakfast, we're looking at 200-300 gallons of water that it takes to make that breakfast. Think about how heavy it would be to haul 200 gallons of water just to make your breakfast. So there are choices we can make in terms of our food, which would dramatically reduce our water footprint. Bottled water is one of those controversial issues for several reasons. One is bottled water necessary? A lot of communities, they don't have very perfectly good tap water. Some don't. I mean, places like Flint, Michigan have lead problems. That shouldn't have never happened, and everybody should have access to good water out of the tap. Our consumption of bottled water has skyrocketed. It's in probably 1 billion bottles a year or something. It's a gigantic number now. So there's a big problem with the waste, the plastic, because only a small percentage of the plastic water bottles are recycled. A lot of that plastic ends up in waterways and oceans. Another problem with something like this is it takes about 5 or 6 of these in terms of just water, so the volume that would be in 5 or 6 of these, just to make this bottle. It seems kind of insane. You get this much water to drink, but it takes 5 or 6 more bottles just to make the plastic container. Because oil needs to be pumped out of the ground, but it takes water to do that. It takes water to turn this into plastic. So meat products are very water intensive, the most water intensive of all the things that we eat. It takes 10 times as many gallons of water to produce a calorie of meat than it does for plant matter. So in the case of just a regular small hamburger, you're looking at 600 gallons of water just for one hamburger. And the reason is that cattle don't drink that much water. It's because of all the stuff that they eat. So they eat all these grains and forages. They take a lot of water to grow, and they need a huge volume of that to be able to produce the meat. They're very inefficient in that sense, both from an energy point of view, but also from a water point of view. So it's not the best way for us to get our nutrition. Clothing is another major user of water. So if you can imagine a field of cotton, cotton's almost always grown in dry places because it reduces the disease problem. But cotton is a very thirsty crop. It needs a lot of water. So the pair of jeans that I'm wearing probably took 2,000 gallons just to produce the cotton and to wash the cotton and process the cotton and dye the material. So clothing is one of the major users of water, and we all have like a closet full of water, basically. All the clothes we have in there, probably 1 million gallons for many of us, just sitting in the closet, often clothes we don't even wear anymore. So I always try and recommend that people, recycle their clothes, pass them on to other folks, so that the water that is embedded in those clothing can be put to use, continue to be put to use, so we don't have to make more new clothes, meaning we have to draw more water out of the ground and out of the environment to produce them. We all have perfectly good clothes that we don't wear anymore. Well, one of the things we do is we need to measure the water. Now, not just the water that we use in our house, so the water we see in our showers and in our toilets. Mind you, many places like California don't actually measure the water they use in the house. A lot of places still don't have water meters. So yeah, good idea to measure it. The other thing is the measurement of the water for all these other things that we need water for to make our clothes, to grow our food. These are not measured very accurately at all, and they're rarely factored in in decisions to expand a particular industry. Let's say a new car plant. Well, a new car plant is going to take a huge amount of water because cars, just like anything else in our societies, requires enormous amounts of water to make all the parts and to generate the energy for it. So we're not keeping track. We're also not costing water properly. So most places assume water is free or next to free. And it's never a big part of the cost equation. If water was priced properly, we would use a lot less of it, priced for its value to us and to the fact that there's a limited amount of water that we have in any one area or on the planet. Well, we're using more groundwater than can be sustained in almost every place on the planet. California is another interesting example where they've used much more of the groundwater than can be sustained. And what's happened in California and many other places where this has gone on is the ground starts to sink 10 feet, 20 feet. Around the world, there's a lot of cities that are sinking because they've been sucking water out of the ground. And that's obviously a kind of a foolish proposition in a way, because you're actually going to lead to collapsing cities because they don't have any water to keep sort of a bubble over top of the city, to keep it from sinking into the ground. The other thing is these cities are going to have water shortages because they've used up their groundwater resources. And where are they going to get the water from? So California has pipelines everywhere to get water for that reason. Not everybody can do that because the water comes from somebody else. Somebody else is downstream or upstream, and we all need water. So how do you resolve those kinds of issues without getting into conflicts? Whose water is it? Well, golf courses are big users of water. Some golf courses are much better at it than they used to be. They used to get a lot of criticism for this, both from their consumption, the amount of water, but also from pollution from the fertilizers they used. So a round of golf ends up being 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, depending on the course, gallons of water is being consumed in your round of golf. Grass is a not very good crop in many parts of the world. It takes a lot of water to keep it going, a lot of pesticides and fertilizers. So you end up with impacts on water in several different ways. It's a sport that, you could argue isn't a necessity, but, there's better ways to do golf courses. You can make fairways narrower, which makes them more challenging. So in other words, have less grass. And you can also use different types of grasses. Everybody likes the Kentucky blue-green, I think. Grass is the popular type. But there's other types of grass that are much more drought tolerant. They don't need as much water. And some progressive courses are actually doing that. So the top two uses of water that are agriculture. 70% of the water humanity uses is for agriculture. And the next big chunk is energy. The third biggest chunk would be in the clothing industry. The fourth, depends on where you are. A lot of industrial uses use a lot of energy. For instance, mining is a big water user. So that's probably the fourth. And the fifth might be some other industry that I can't think of right now. But our household use would be bottom of the list, really. What I'd like people to recognize is water is more useful and valuable than oil, and we need to act like it's more useful and valuable than oil. Everybody talks about oil prices and oil prices going up and down, and nobody ever talks about water or water prices. And if we do talk about it, the price is, again, so small that it doesn't change the way we use our water. So what I would like to see is proper pricing for water that reflects its value. At the same time, we have to think about, well, what about poor people? They need water too. How do we work this out? One suggested idea is to have a minimum water allotment, say 100 gallons essentially is free. And when you use more, you have to pay more. Many industries pay less the more they use. It's a perverse setup where heavy water-using industries, let's say steel making, once they start using millions of gallons of water, they pay a very small pittance. The same thing for bottled water companies. Bottled water companies often pay maybe $1 or $2 or $10 for 1 million gallons of water they take out of the ground, or they just take it for free, depending on the situation. So that can't continue. It's clearly unsustainable. Those are the kinds of things that we can do that will reduce our water use, help us understand how important water is to our daily lives and for our entire way of life. So those are some of the things I suggest. So one of the amazing things about the Real Truth in Health and Environment Conference is the diversity of viewpoints, these ideas. I mean, we should never be afraid of ideas. It's one of the things I learned in my many years as a journalist, often working with indigenous people. They have some very different beliefs than we do here in the Western world. It doesn't mean they're wrong. I mean, indigenous cultures have been around for thousands of years. They believe the things they believe because they make sense to them and they work in their societies. So we can learn from them if we're open-minded. And I think that's what this particular conference is really strong on, is the diversity of ideas. Sure, you're not going to agree with a lot of them, perhaps, but it doesn't mean these may have some really strong, valid points about where we are on this planet and where we're going. Because we're not going in the right direction, so we need to be asking difficult questions about why, how did we get here? Where are we going? And what are we going to do about it? Because we need to do things very differently than we've been doing so far, because keeping doing the same things we've been doing is just going to take us off the end of a cliff. So yeah, I'm very happy to be a participant in this conference where people are willing to share their ideas. Some of them, might come across as a bit loony, but there's tons of other really great ideas that I've already learned. And that's the kind of way in which we're going to get ourselves out of the mess we've put ourselves into. So thanks.